The air in our Beverly Hills home, which usually carried the subtle scent of oak and the lavender essential oil I adored, was now thick with a different aroma, the overpowering, nauseating scent of stargazer lilies. My throat began to itch, my eyes swelled, and my chest felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand. The asthma attack hit harder than any I had ever experienced. Victoria, my husband Lawrence's first love, had brought them an hour ago. She wore an immaculate white silk dress, light makeup, and her long hair fell loosely over her shoulders, making her look as pure as a muse. Victoria knew perfectly well that I had a severe allergy to pollen, especially from lilies, yet she smiled. It was the same smile I had seen for years in the old photographs Lawrence still kept in the back of a drawer. "I know Eleanor loves flowers," she beamed, extending the enormous bouquet to me. "I chose the biggest, most beautiful one especially for you to congratulate you on the pregnancy." I tried to refuse, but she insisted on placing it in a vase. Lawrence wasn't home. He had an important shift at the hospital. Now that bouquet of flowers was like a monster, sucking all the oxygen from the air around me. Stumbling, I ran to the bedroom, trying to reach my familiar asthma inhaler on the nightstand. But when I grabbed it, my heart sank. It was light as a feather. Trembling, I opened the cap and saw that it was empty, with no trace of the medication. Someone had emptied its contents. A chill ran down my spine. I rushed to the balcony window, desperate for a breath of fresh air, but the latch was strangely stuck. No matter how hard I pushed, it wouldn't budge. I was trapped, cornered in my own home, with the scent that was killing me. Panicked, I grabbed my cell phone. Lawrence, of course. Lawrence. He was the most prestigious chief of surgery at the hospital. He would know what to do. He would save me. I dialed his number, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang 3 times before he answered, but it wasn't his warm, familiar voice. "I'm busy." "What is it?" "Make it quick." "Lawrence, come home." Now I managed to say, my chest aching. "I can't breathe." "The lilies. I'm suffocating, Lawrence." I tried to inhale, gathering my last bit of strength. "I'm 3 months pregnant with our child." There was a silence for a few seconds on the other end. I could almost hear him scowling. Then, a cold, cruel voice hit me like a punch. "Eleanor, stop the drama. You think I don't know you saw Victoria at the house today? Stop using that ridiculous allergy of yours to get attention." I was petrified, trying to explain. "No, it's not that, Vic." "Shut up," he shouted, cutting me off. "Victoria is here with acute appendicitis, doubled over in pain. I'm prepping her for surgery. A person's life is on the line. Stop making trouble." The monotone, lethal dial tone echoed in my ear. He had hung up on my last hope. The hope for my child, not yet fully formed, had been crushed by the hands of the man I loved most. I collapsed onto the cold floor. The lingering sound of the disconnected call was more terrifying than any scream in that silent room. He said I was making a drama. He said Victoria's appendicitis was more important. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with my growing breathlessness. No, I couldn't die. My son couldn't die. With trembling hands, I quickly dialed 911. I tried to suppress the spasms in my chest, using my last breath to clearly state the address of our house and my condition. Acute asthma attack. Allergic reaction. 3 months pregnant. I can't breathe. The operator's voice on the other end sounded urgent but calming. "Stay calm, ma'am. I have the address. The ambulance from the nearest station, which is at Cedar Heights Medical Center, where your husband works, will be there in 5-7 minutes at the most. Please try to stay on the line." 5 minutes, I murmured to myself. Just 5 more minutes and my son and I will be safe. I curled up on the floor, clinging to the phone, my eyes fixed on the door, counting every second. Each second passed as slowly as a century. My chest felt like it was about to explode. But 5 minutes passed, then 10, and still no sound of a siren. Just as my consciousness began to fade, the phone rang again. It was 911. I answered hastily. "Mrs. Miller?" The operator's voice was full of embarrassment. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but the ambulance closest to you has just been diverted for an emergency." My heart stopped. What? How? How diverted? I'm in critical condition. It was a direct order from the chief of surgery. Dr. Lawrence Miller from Cedar Heights Medical Center. The operator hesitated. He demanded that ambulance go immediately to pick up a VIP patient in another area, stating it was an extremely urgent appendicitis surgery. The system is trying to find a vehicle from a more distant station. The estimated time is another 20 to 25 minutes. Please, try to hang on. 25 minutes. When I felt I couldn't last another 5. So it was you. It was you who stole the only ambulance that could save my life and my son's. He chose to send the ambulance for Victoria rather than let it come to save his own wife. My consciousness began to slip away. The image of our 3-month ultrasound on my desk flashed through my mind. I remembered how irritable Lawrence had been lately, especially since Victoria had returned. He had said, "That ridiculous asthma of yours is nothing compared to the life or death surgeries I perform. Stop being a burden to me. I thought it was just stress. In the end, I had never been the priority, and my son was just another burden." I bit my lip hard. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth, and the sharp pain helped me stay conscious a moment longer. No, I have to live. I have to live to ask him why he was so cruel to us. Just as my eyelids were about to close, a faint, distant siren finally sounded from the gate. The door burst open. The cold night air flooded the space, bringing with it the smell of hospital disinfectant, the smell I used to find in Lawrence's hair every night when he came home. The smell I once thought was a symbol of salvation now crushed my chest. I was rushed onto a gurney, its wheels screeching on the cold granite floor. The white fluorescent lights of the ceiling passed over my blurred face in a rapid streak. Shouts, cries, the beeping of monitors, everything merged into a chaotic din in the emergency room. I clung to the one hope that having made it this far, I would be saved. Patient in acute respiratory failure, suspected anaphylactic shock from pollen allergy. 3 months pregnant. Pupils are starting to dilate. An orderly shouted to the doctor, pushing the gurney, trying to be heard over the noise. I saw a group of doctors and nurses in white coats running toward me. But just as they were about to take me to the intensive care unit, a figure raised a hand to stop them. It was a head nurse with a severe face and hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, her expression blank. "Wait," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "Take her to the observation room on the other side." "But this patient is in critical condition," the doctor yelled. "Can't you see? She's about to stop breathing." The head nurse glanced at me, her gaze impassive. "I know, but there's no other option. The entire elite team, including the specialized ventilator, has been mobilized for the VIP surgical suite. For Dr. Lawrence's case," she said firmly, each word like a nail being hammered into my ears. "There's an extremely urgent appendicitis surgery. Everything has to be prioritized for that operation." "Those are the orders. Follow them." VIP appendicitis, Dr. Lawrence. Those 3 phrases echoed in my mind. Bitterness rose in my throat, but I no longer had the strength to cry. I began to have mild convulsions, my chest crushed by 2 boulders. "My God, are you all insane?" At that moment, a young, indignant voice rang out. A young man in a white coat and glasses, with a delicate but flushed face, approached. It was Daniel. He looked at my chart, then at me, stunned. "Eleanor? This is Eleanor, Dr. Lawrence's wife." He turned to the head nurse and shouted, "Do you realize who this woman is? A patient in respiratory failure, and you're sending her to an observation room? What kind of appendicitis is more important than a human life? What about your professional ethics?" The head nurse seemed taken aback by the young doctor's fury. She took a step back but tried to maintain her rigid composure. "Dr. Evans, these are orders from the chief, Dr. Lawrence. I'm just following protocol. The VIP surgery is upstairs." "What VIP? Her appendicitis surgery is VIP, but his wife's life isn't?" Daniel interrupted, his voice trembling with rage. Without another word, he firmly grabbed my gurney. "Come with me," he said to the residents. He pushed me through the long, cold hallways. I didn't know where he was taking me. I only saw the ceiling lights flashing by faster and faster. We stopped in the surgical area, where the smell of disinfectant was even stronger. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with my growing breathlessness. No, I couldn't die. My son couldn't die. With trembling hands, I quickly dialed 911. I tried to suppress the spasms in my chest, using my last breath to clearly state the address of our house and my condition. Acute asthma attack. Allergic reaction. 3 months pregnant. I can't breathe. The operator's voice on the other end sounded urgent but calming. Stay calm, ma'am. I have the address. Lawrence stood there, still in his green scrubs, the mask hanging around his neck, his face clearly showing his irritation at being interrupted. Who gave you permission to make a scene here? He roared, the voice I once loved now sounding alien and authoritarian. Dr. Miller, your wife, Daniel pointed at me, his voice cracking. Eleanor is in critical condition, acute respiratory failure. She's dying. How could you? Lawrence glanced in my direction. His gaze passed over me without a hint of compassion or concern, only annoyance. He turned back to Daniel and laughed with disdain. What drama is this now? You're new to the profession, what do you know? Her asthma isn't going to kill her. She's just good at playing the victim. I heard every word he said, clear and sharp, echoing in the hallway. Playing the victim. He said I was making a scene. He said I wasn't going to die. But she's pregnant, Daniel shouted desperately. I have a complex surgery, Lawrence cut him off coldly. This patient is more important. Go back to the ER and stop making trouble if you don't want to face a disciplinary hearing. With that, Lawrence turned, about to slam the door shut. Lawrence! Daniel yelled, his final question loaded with fury. Your wife's life? Your son's life? Do they mean nothing to you? Lawrence paused for a second. Without turning around, he replied coldly, his voice resonating. Security. Get this guy out of here immediately. He's disturbing the order in the surgical area. The steel door slammed shut with a deafening crash, leaving me outside with my despair. 2 security guards appeared from nowhere and grabbed Daniel's arms. He struggled, his gaze toward me filled with helplessness as he was dragged toward the elevator. I was left there on the cold gurney in the middle of a deserted hallway. The guards had taken Daniel. The VIP door remained shut. Lawrence was inside, giving his all to save his old flame, and I, his wife, was left here like a broken, discarded object. The air grew thinner. My chest felt crushed by a slab of stone. Each breath was a painful effort. My consciousness began to fade. I saw my mother smiling gently, beckoning me to come to her. Maybe this really was the end. The moment I was about to give up, there was a loud noise. Dr. Daniel had somehow managed to escape the 2 guards. He ran toward me, his face red with anger and exertion. I can't just leave her here, he shouted, more to himself than to me. He didn't try to pound on the operating room door again. He knew it was useless. He grabbed my gurney and pushed it quickly back toward the ER. If they won't save her, I will. We raced through the hallways back to the initial chaotic area. The head nurse saw Daniel bringing me back and scowled. Dr. Evans, get out of the way. Daniel yelled, pushing me directly into a small observation room with only some basic equipment. He turned to the door and looked directly at a few young nursing interns who were cowering in a corner, terrified. Anyone who still has a conscience, come and help me, Daniel shouted. The patient is in respiratory arrest. Do you want to stand there and watch her die? Daniel's words were like an electric shock. The young nurses looked at each other, then gritted their teeth and ran into the room. One of them quickly grabbed a pulse oximeter. Another prepared an intubation tube. Saturation is at 70%. Fetal heart rate is weak, a resident reported, trembling. There's no specialized ventilator. They took everything to the VIP suite, another said, her voice on the verge of tears. Use the ambu bag, Daniel ordered in a firm voice. He quickly intubated me, a difficult maneuver as I was convulsing slightly. Ventilate, fast! I felt a forced stream of air enter my lungs. It hurt, but at least I could breathe. I opened my eyes and saw Daniel's sweaty face and the strange, young but determined faces of the nursing interns. They were strangers. They didn't know me, but they were fighting for my life. While my husband, the man I loved most, the one who swore to protect me, was somewhere else, saving someone else. Hang on, Eleanor, Daniel whispered in my ear, over the rhythmic sound of the bag being squeezed. For your son, you have to hang on. For my son. Yes, I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin. I couldn't die. I had to live. Time passed in that suffocating room. I don't know how long. I only heard the constant beep of the heart monitor and the tired, rhythmic sound of the ambu bag being squeezed by the residents. They took turns, sweat running down their foreheads. Doctor setting 10, to the 710 and how. Daniel never left my side for a single moment, constantly monitoring my vital signs and giving occasional orders. This room was an oasis of life, a tense battle for survival. But outside the door, the world seemed to have forgotten us. No other doctor appeared. No head nurse came to ask how I was. Perhaps Lawrence's orders had scared everyone off. They didn't dare get involved with the problem patient that I was. Then, from the silent hallway outside, came the ding of the elevator and the rolling of a gurney's wheels. The VIP OR door must have opened. I heard Lawrence's voice. His tone, far from irritated or tense, sounded relieved, even a little tender. "How are you feeling? Does it hurt less?" His voice sounded very close. I tilted my head to look through the crack of the partially open observation room door. I saw Lawrence walking beside a gurney, and the person lying on it was Victoria. Her eyes were closed, her face a little pale, but she seemed to be fine. Lawrence leaned over and gently brushed a few strands of hair from her forehead. "Easy now, just rest. The surgery is over. There's no more danger. I'm taking you to the recovery room." A nurse timidly approached Lawrence. "Dr. Miller, your wife is in the observation room. Her condition—" Lawrence waved his hand dismissively, impatience reappearing on his face. "What a nuisance. Just leave her there. I'll take Victoria to her room first." He didn't even glance in the direction of the room where I was lying. To him, I was truly less than dust. Resentment welled up in my chest, causing it to contract violently. In that precise instant, the fetal heart monitor beside me, which had been emitting a weak, steady beep, suddenly let out a high-pitched, shrill sound and then fell silent. The line on the screen, which had been faint waves, turned into a straight, flat line. "Doctor." But 5 minutes passed, then 10, and still no sound of a siren. Just as my consciousness began to fade, the phone rang again. It was 911. I answered hastily. "Mrs. Miller?" The operator's voice was full of embarrassment. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but the ambulance closest to you has just been diverted for an emergency." My heart stopped. "What? How? How diverted? I'm in critical condition." It was a direct order from the chief of surgery. "Doctor." Time seemed to stand still. Daniel's words, "Your son is dead," echoed through the hospital hallway, sharp and clear. Lawrence stood motionless, as if struck by lightning. His expression shifted from annoyance to shock, and then to confusion. He looked at Daniel, then at me, lying motionless in the room, his eyes filled with disbelief. You're talking nonsense," Lawrence stammered, his voice breaking. He left Victoria on the gurney and rushed into the observation room. The scene before him left him cold. I lay there, my skin livid, my lips purple from the prolonged lack of oxygen. The residents were still taking turns ventilating me, but the fetal heart monitor beside me showed a cold, flat line. "No, it can't be," Lawrence muttered. He ran to the monitor, staring at the screen, and then, like a madman, he grabbed the portable ultrasound machine Daniel had brought in. His hands, which were always steady holding a scalpel, were now trembling as he hastily applied the gel to my belly. He moved the probe himself, his eyes fixed on the black and white screen. Silence. Only a terrifying silence. No heartbeat, no sign of life. "No!" Lawrence screamed, a cry filled with denial and panic. "She tricked me. She was only 3 months along. She faked it all to hurt me." He turned abruptly to Daniel, grabbing him by the collar of his lab coat, his eyes bloodshot. "It was you, wasn't it? What did you do to her? What kind of treatment is this for her to end up like this?" Daniel didn't resist, only looking directly into Lawrence's eyes, his gaze filled with contempt and pain. He forcefully pushed Lawrence's hands away. "You're asking me? Ask yourself. The only one who killed your son was you." It was you who ignored your wife's plea for help. It was you who stole her ambulance. It was you who monopolized all the medical equipment for an appendectomy while your wife was dying just a few steps away. Do you still consider yourself a human being, Lawrence? Every word from Daniel was like a hammer, striking down Lawrence's attempts at denial. He stumbled backward, leaning against the wall. He looked at me, then at his own hands. The hands that had saved so many lives, but today had been indirectly responsible for the death of his own child. Lawrence completely broke down. The facade of the talented, cold, and arrogant chief of surgery shattered, leaving only a failed man, a guilty father. "No, I didn't know it was that serious," he murmured as if talking to himself. "She usually has tantrums, plays the victim. I thought this time would be like the others." Daniel laughed sarcastically, a bitter smile. "You're a doctor, and you can't distinguish between a tantrum and acute respiratory failure? Or was it just that since the person on the operating table wasn't Victoria, you didn't care?" Daniel's line was like the final blow, hitting Lawrence's nerve center. He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Save her. At least save Eleanor. I'm begging you." "Only now you remember your wife." Daniel shook his head, his voice weary. "It's late, but don't worry. We're not as inhuman as you are. We'll do everything we can." With that, Daniel turned his back on Lawrence and, with the help of the nurses, rushed me to a nearby emergency operating room. This time, no one dared to stop them. The head nurse from before stood in a corner, pale as a ghost. The entire hospital seemed to know what had happened by now. Murmurs began to spread. As the operating room door closed, the last thing I saw was Lawrence kneeling on the hallway floor, his hands on his head. The man who had always walked with his head held high, who considered himself the center of the universe, had finally bent to the consequences of his actions. But it was too late. My son was gone, and my love for him had died with our baby. In the haze of anesthesia, I remembered our wedding day. Lawrence took my hand and promised to spend his life protecting me. He had said, "I'm a doctor. I will never let you suffer any physical pain." That promise, heard now, sounded like the most ironic of lies. I woke up in a strange, stark white room. The smell of disinfectant invaded my nostrils, familiar yet nauseating. My throat was sore, likely a side effect of the prolonged intubation. I moved slightly, and a sharp pain in my chest and lower abdomen made me wince. I looked around. It wasn't a normal hospital room. Complex machines surrounded the bed with wires connected to my body. The ICU. I knew I had been through major surgery. And then I felt it in emptiness. Slowly, I brought my hand to my belly, where just hours before there had been a small bump, the home of my little one. It was now flat and cold under the thin hospital gown. My baby was gone. The truth hit me not with a crash, but like a current of icy water seeping into every cell, freezing my heart. Tears began to fall silently, running down my temples and soaking the pillow. I wasn't crying from the physical pain. I was crying for my child. He never even had the chance to feel the sun or hear my voice, and he had to leave so unfairly. I remembered the first ultrasound. I remembered Lawrence's joy at seeing the small black dot on the screen. He had hugged me tightly, saying it was the best gift life had ever given him. He bought every baby item imaginable, even when I said it was too soon. Every night, he would whisper to my belly, telling our son stories about the outside world. Those sweet memories were now as sharp as knives, tearing my soul apart. Had it all been a sham? Or was that love, that anticipation, not enough to overcome his selfishness and his old flame? The room door opened softly. Dr. Daniel entered, his face exhausted. He saw that I was awake and crying and didn't dare to look me in the eye. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer, just looked at him, my eyes asking a silent question. Daniel understood. He lowered his head, his voice filled with guilt. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but due to the prolonged lack of oxygen, the fetus didn't survive. We had to perform a procedure to remove it, otherwise your life would have been in danger too." "I am so sorry, Eleanor." I closed my eyes, not wanting to say anything more. I stayed in the hospital for a few more days. Lawrence was not allowed to visit me. Perhaps the hospital had isolated him, or perhaps he himself didn't have the courage to face me. I didn't want to see him either. Silence at that moment was the best thing for both of us. Dr. Daniel was the only one who regularly stopped by my room. He didn't talk much, just checked my vitals, asked how I was, and then left. But I knew he was discreetly helping me. It was he who reported the entire incident to the hospital administration. One afternoon, as I was looking out the window, Daniel came in with a folder in his hand. "Feeling any better?" he asked, his voice gentle. "As well as can be expected." "Thank you, Daniel. For everything. Thank you so much." Daniel managed a sad smile. "It was nothing. It was my duty." He sat in the chair by the bed, looking a bit hesitant. "Eleanor, there's something I think you should know." He opened the folder. Inside were the results of the hospital's preliminary investigation. He pointed to a few details. "When you were admitted to the ER, do you know why the entire elite team was mobilized? It wasn't just for Victoria, Lawrence's old flame." I looked at him, confused. "Victoria," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "is the daughter of one of the main shareholders on this hospital's board of directors. Her surgery, though it was just appendicitis, was treated as a top priority case. Lawrence did it partly for his old love, but the main reason was to curry favor with Victoria's father." My head spun. Shareholder, curry favor. So this wasn't just a love triangle story, it was also a game of power and ambition. My husband had not only sold our marriage, but also his medical ethics, all for a chance at a promotion. He gambled my life and my son's life to please someone who could help him secure his position as chief of surgery. "He calculated everything?" I murmured, feeling a deep revulsion. "Exactly," Daniel nodded. "He thought your asthma wasn't serious, that you would be fine. He was overconfident in himself and underestimated your life. And that is a doctor's greatest crime." The truth was revealed, naked and cruel. I no longer cried. The pain had transformed into rage. I looked outside at the skyscrapers standing tall. How could the world of the rich and powerful be so cold and inhuman? I had been so naive, thinking love could conquer all. But I was wrong. In Lawrence's world, love was just a chess piece, and I was just a sacrificial pawn. After learning the whole truth, I felt as if I had lost my soul. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Lawrence tenderly caring for me, his happiness upon learning of my pregnancy, and his coldness in leaving me to die, intertwined in my mind, torturing me. I had loved a monster. I had blindly trusted a cruel calculator. The next morning, when I had finally fallen into a light sleep, the door opened and Lawrence came in. He had probably begged the administration or used some influence to see me. He looked exhausted, with an unshaven beard, his white coat wrinkled. His usual impeccable and well-groomed appearance was gone, leaving only weariness and remorse. He sat silently in the chair by the bed, not daring to look at me. After a long while, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse and broken. "Eleanor, I'm sorry." I remained silent, turning my face to the window, to the gray sky outside. Sorry. What did those words mean now? Could they bring my son back? Could they erase the betrayal and the pain he caused me? "I truly didn't know it was so serious," Lawrence continued, his voice full of anguish. "Victoria's surgery," her father called the director directly. "I was under pressure. I had no other choice. I thought your asthma was like always, that a little rest would solve it." He was trying to explain himself, to find an excuse for his actions, but every word he said only disgusted me more. He blamed the pressure, his own complacency, but he forgot that he was the one who ignored my plea for help, who accused me of making a drama. "I thought you were just throwing another one of your tantrums, faking it like always." "Who would have thought?" Lawrence muttered. That phrase was the last straw. I turned sharply and looked him in the eyes. There were no more tears in mine, only an extreme coldness. "Faking it?" I laughed, a twisted smile that hurt more than crying. "Yes, I played the role of the foolish, blind wife perfectly for all these years. And you're a talented actor too. You played the role of the loving husband, the expectant father to perfection. Your performance was so brilliant that I believed it was real. Congratulations, Lawrence. You've won." Lawrence was petrified by my words. "Eleanor, don't talk like that," he stammered. "I know I was wrong. Give me a chance to make it up to you, please." "A chance?" I repeated, my voice as sharp as a blade. "Did you give my son a chance to live, Lawrence? Or was his chance traded for your chance at a promotion?" Lawrence sat there with his head down, his broad shoulders trembling. He was crying. For the first time in years of marriage, I saw him cry. But those belated tears failed to move my frozen heart. "I know," he said after a long while, looking up with his reddened eyes. "I know nothing I say now matters. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I'm just asking you not to leave me. I've already lost my son. I can't lose you too." He reached out his hand for mine. The hand I once loved, where I found warmth and protection, now caused me repulsion. I snatched my hand away as if I had touched fire. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice weak. Lawrence was in shock. The distance I had created was so cold and final that he realized nothing could be salvaged. "Eleanor—" "Don't say my name," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear my name come from your mouth. It makes me feel dirty." In the following days, I didn't exchange another word with Lawrence. I recovered my health in silence, bearing the pain of losing my son alone. My mother came from our town in the Central Valley to take care of me. Seeing my weakened state, she just hugged me and cried. She didn't ask many questions. Daniel had probably already told her everything. My mother's love and silence were the only strength that kept me going in those dark days. When my health improved, I asked my mother to find a lawyer. She brought me a divorce petition, already drafted. The day Lawrence was allowed to visit me again, he brought a bowl of still warm chicken soup, a dish I used to love. He set the bowl on the table, forcing a smile. "Eat something, to get your strength back." I didn't look at him, or the soup. I pulled the divorce petition from under my pillow and threw it at him. The white paper fluttered and landed at his feet. "Sign it," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Lawrence bent down to pick up the paper. He stared at the words "divorce petition" printed in bold. His face turned pale. "Eleanor, do you really want this? Can't we start over?" "Start over?" I laughed, a bitter smile. "Start over from where? From the moment you left me to die, or from the moment my son stopped breathing?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice hardening with each word. "Sign it. It's the last thing I'm asking of you. From now on, you go your way, and I'll go mine. We have no relationship anymore." Lawrence held the paper, his body trembling violently. He looked at me, his eyes full of desperation and pleading. He still didn't want to accept that this marriage, this love, everything was over. At that moment of extreme tension, the door suddenly opened. Victoria, wearing a light blue patient gown, entered weakly in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. Her face was lightly made up, looking pale and pitiful, but deep in her eyes, a spark of triumph she couldn't hide shone through. "Lawrence." "Eleanor," Victoria said, her voice as weak as a kitten's. "I heard you were awake, so I came to visit you." Lawrence turned and saw her, a hint of confusion on his face. He hurried to hide the divorce petition behind his back. "What are you doing here? You just had surgery. You need to rest," he said, his tone a little scolding but still affectionate. Victoria ignored Lawrence and addressed me with a look of false goodwill, her eyes filling with tears. She said in a voice full of remorse, "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. I didn't know your allergy to the lilies was so severe. I just thought of bringing a little gift to congratulate you. Who would have thought?" She began to sob, her shoulders shaking. Lawrence was just worried about me. "The doctor said if my appendicitis wasn't operated on in time, it could rupture and be fatal. He's a doctor. He can't see someone dying and not help. Please, don't be angry with him. If you have to blame someone, blame me." A perfect performance. She played the role of the innocent, fragile victim who had accidentally caused a tragedy. She blamed herself, but in reality, she was justifying Lawrence's actions and implying that I was a selfish wife, unable to understand her husband's life-saving career. I sat on the bed, silently watching her theater. Before, maybe I would have believed it, I would have felt guilty. But now, it just seemed ridiculous. Her falseness was obvious and despicable. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It was just an accident, bringing the flowers." Victoria looked up, her teary eyes looking at me, and nodded frantically. "Yes, I really didn't mean to, Eleanor." "And that my asthma inhaler was emptied," I continued, my voice still steady, "and that the latch on my bedroom window was strangely stuck. That must have been an accident too, right?" My questions were like a bucket of cold water poured over her performance. The tears on Victoria's face suddenly stopped. She froze, a hint of panic in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, trying to maintain her innocent expression. Lawrence also frowned and turned to me. "Eleanor, what nonsense is this? Why are you blaming Victoria? How would she know about those things?" "Blaming?" I laughed with disdain, an icy smile. "I'm not in the habit of blaming anyone, Lawrence. I'm just telling the truth." I picked up my cell phone from the table. The screen still showed his missed calls and messages. I ignored them and opened another app. "It's a shame for both of you," I said, my eyes still on the phone screen. "Last week I installed a small security camera in the living room. I just hadn't had time to tell you yet." Upon hearing the word camera, Victoria's expression changed instantly. It went from panic to a deathly pallor. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Lawrence was also in shock. He looked at me, then at Victoria, his gaze full of suspicion. "Are you serious? You don't believe me?" I turned the phone screen in his direction. "Well, see for yourself. See what her accident was like." I hit play. The screen showed a clear image of our living room from the day before. The video recorded Victoria entering with the huge bouquet of lilies and leaving it on the table. After I went to the kitchen for water, she quickly looked around and slipped into our bedroom. The bedroom door was out of the camera's angle, but a few minutes later, she returned holding my inhaler. The video clearly showed Victoria going to the balcony, turning the inhaler upside down, and emptying all the medication into the air. Then she casually tossed the empty inhaler into a potted plant and came back inside, sitting on the sofa and smiling as if nothing had happened. Lawrence stared at the screen, his hands trembling violently. His expression went from suspicion to shock and then to extreme disappointment and fury. He turned sharply to Victoria, who was paralyzed in the wheelchair, her face as white as paper. "Victoria, explain yourself. What is this?" Lawrence roared, his voice no longer one of concern, but of interrogation and outrage. Cornered, with her saintly mask torn away, Victoria stopped pretending. She raised her head, her teary eyes now shining with hatred and madness. "Yes," she screamed, her shrill voice breaking the silence of the room. "It was me. So what? Do you know how I've lived all these years, Lawrence?" She turned to him, who was paralyzed by shock. "The person who should be your wife, who should be having your children, was me, not her. Just because my parents objected at the time, just because of a small misunderstanding, you ran off and found this bitch to replace me. What does she have that I don't? Besides the luck of inheriting a fortune." Victoria's poisonous and resentful words were like knives, not just for me, but also for Lawrence. In her eyes, I was just a substitute, a lucky shadow. "Are you insane, Victoria?" Lawrence took a step back, his voice trembling. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. The gentle, fragile woman he had always wanted to protect had revealed her true demon face. "Insane?" Victoria let out a wild laugh. "Yes, I'm insane. Insane for loving you. I couldn't stand to see you happy with her, about to have a child with her. I waited 5 years, Lawrence. I waited for the day her illness would worsen. I waited a long time for this opportunity. If she died, you would come back to me. We would be like before." She spoke while crying, her words frantic and distorted. The play had come to an end. All that remained was the rawness of a conspiracy disguised as sick love. Lawrence was stunned, speechless. In the end, he was just a pawn, an excuse for Victoria to execute her evil plan. He had been manipulated, used without realizing it because of his own blindness. He had almost become an accomplice to a murderer. The scene in the room was chaotic. Victoria kept screaming and lamenting her pain and her blind love. Lawrence stood there, dazed, as if he still couldn't believe what had just happened. The performance he and Victoria had staged together had crumbled in the most unexpected way. He turned to me, his gaze desperate and pleading. "Eleanor, you saw. It was all her fault. I'm a victim too. I didn't know about her plan." He was trying to evade his responsibility. He wanted to blame Victoria for everything, to become a poor victim of a love triangle. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Victim?" I repeated, my voice glacial. "You say you're a victim?" I sat up straight slowly, ripped the IV catheter from my hand, ignoring the sharp pain. I got off the bed, walking barefoot on the cold floor, and approached Lawrence. "Then let me ask you," I said, looking him in the eyes. "If you hadn't ignored my call for help when I couldn't breathe, would her plan have succeeded?" Lawrence took a step back. "If you hadn't selfishly diverted the only ambulance to go get her, would my son and I have gone through those 25 minutes of hell?" He took another step back, his face paling. "And if you hadn't inhumanely monopolized all the elite equipment, leaving me to wait for death in the hallway for 2 hours, would my son have died, Lawrence?" Each of my questions was like a hammer crushing his weak attempts at denial. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My voice was calm, but every word was as sharp as a knife. "Victoria was the one who lit the match," I said, my voice firm. "But you, Lawrence, were the one who poured the gasoline, who pushed my son and me into the flames. She was the mastermind, but you were the accomplice in the death of your own son. You are both equally dirty and cruel." My words were like a final sentence, crushing all of Lawrence's attempts to apologize. He collapsed into the nearest chair, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. The truth, naked and cruel, had been completely exposed. There were no more masks to hide behind. Victoria, seeing Lawrence break down, also stopped screaming. She sat in the wheelchair, her eyes empty, staring at nothing. Perhaps she realized that her elaborate plan, the love she fought to the death for, had turned to smoke. She hadn't managed to keep Lawrence, and she had also put herself on a path to prison. The air in the room became thick, suffocating. The nurse who pushed Victoria's wheelchair had already slipped away. Only the 3 of us were left. 3 people drowning in the tragedy we ourselves had created. I turned around and walked back to the bed. I didn't want to see them for another second. I felt exhausted. In this battle, although I had won by exposing their true faces, I had also lost. I had lost my son, my faith, my love, and 5 years of my youth. I picked up the divorce petition from the floor and placed it on the table right in front of Lawrence. "Sign it," I said, my voice tired. "It's the last thing I'm telling you. After you sign, disappear from my life. Don't ever appear in front of me again." Lawrence raised his head, his eyes red and swollen. He looked at me, then at the paper. His trembling hand picked up the pen, but he didn't sign. He just sat there staring into space like a lost soul. At that moment, the room door burst open. My mother and Dr. Daniel entered. My mother saw the chaotic scene. Victoria, sitting dazed in the wheelchair, and Lawrence, collapsed next to the divorce petition. She understood everything. She didn't say anything, just quietly came over and put a warm jacket over my shoulders. My mother's thin, wrinkled hand stroked my back, a wordless but immensely comforting solace. Daniel went straight to Lawrence. He looked at his colleague, the chief of surgery he once respected, with a complex gaze, a mixture of anger and pity. "Dr. Miller," Daniel said quietly, "the hospital administration and the police are waiting for you in the conference room. You'd better go." Lawrence was escorted out. Victoria was also taken back to her room by a nurse under the watch of a security guard. The room finally returned to its usual silence, but the air was still as heavy as lead. My mother helped me sit on the bed. She stroked my disheveled hair, her eyes reddened. "My child, why did you have to suffer so much?" she sobbed. I rested my head on my mother's shoulder. Her thin arms held me, familiar and peaceful. For the first time since the nightmare, I allowed myself to be weak, to cry like a child. The tears just fell, wetting my mother's blouse. I cried for my innocent son, for my broken marriage, and for my own foolishness. At that moment, my father arrived hastily from our town. He was still wearing his work clothes, dirty with soil, his face weathered by the sun and wind, marked by extreme worry. My mother must have called him. My father is a simple, honest farmer who has never raised his voice to anyone in his life. But when my mother briefly told him what had happened, his face darkened. He looked at me and then quickly left the room. "Dad, where are you going?" I called out, alarmed. "I'm going to find that bastard," my father growled with a rage I had never seen in him. My mother and I ran after him. We found him blocking the elevator door where Lawrence was being escorted by 2 hospital security guards. Seeing my father, Lawrence instinctively recoiled. You are. "I'm your father-in-law," my father shouted, his voice hoarse with rage, his eyes bloodshot. "You animal! How dare you treat my daughter like this? What wrong has she ever done to you?" The man who had spent his whole life working the fields, who had never gotten into trouble, was standing there confronting his son-in-law, a chief of surgery, to demand justice for his daughter. My father raised his calloused, rough hand, ready to slap Lawrence, but his fist stopped in midair, trembling. Instead of hitting Lawrence, he punched the cold concrete wall next to him hard. A loud, dry thud echoed. Blood spurted from the back of his hand. Why? My father rested his head against the wall, his broad family man's shoulders shaking. He cried the tears of a helpless father, unable to protect his daughter. Seeing that scene, my heart felt like it was being crushed. I ran to hug him from behind. "Dad, please don't do that. I'm okay. I still have you." The chaotic scene in front of the elevator quickly drew the attention of the entire hospital. Lawrence, the talented chief of surgery, being publicly reprimanded by his father-in-law, a simple farmer. Victoria, the shareholder's daughter, being taken away under guard. The story of a shocking conspiracy, of a family tragedy, began to spread through every department at lightning speed. The scandal had erupted. It was impossible to hide. The hospital administration, under pressure from internal public opinion and the risk of the biggest medical ethics scandal in its history, convened an emergency meeting of the disciplinary committee. I, as the victim, provided all the evidence I had. The security camera video, although it didn't show Victoria tampering with the window, was enough to prove her intent to harm me. I helped my parents with farm chores, tended the vegetable garden, or simply sat in the yard reading a book. The manual labor and simple life began to heal my wounds, but the pain of losing my son was still there. Every night, I would wake up startled, my hand instinctively going to my belly, that emptiness. 6 months passed. The quiet life helped me find balance. One day, while organizing my old bookshelf, I found a pile of dusty books. This case was not just a family conflict. It touched the core of medical ethics, a chief of surgery who, for personal reasons and to please his superiors, was willing to neglect the life of his own wife and child. It was an indelible stain. I knew this fight wouldn't be easy. Victoria's father was powerful. He certainly wouldn't let his daughter be punished and wouldn't allow his hospital to be affected. But I wasn't afraid. I had nothing left to lose. I only had one desire: to get justice for my innocent son. The pressure from all sides made it impossible for the hospital administration to cover up the case. Despite Victoria's father's efforts to use his influence, the evidence was too clear, and the outrage within the hospital reached its peak. A few days after the meeting, the final decision was announced. Lawrence was suspended indefinitely without pay to cooperate with the authorities' investigations. The position of chief of surgery, for which he had traded his conscience and his son's life, was stripped from him. From being a rising star in surgery, a model of perfection in everyone's eyes, Lawrence became an outcast. His colleagues avoided him, patients pointed at him. His story became a bitter lesson about the fall of a talent when ethics are lost. As for Victoria, after being released on bail paid by her father, she was quickly discharged and disappeared. It was said that her family had sent her abroad to recover, but in reality, it was to escape public opinion and the law. She cut all contact with Lawrence, abandoning the lover who, because of her, had fallen from grace. The blind, frenetic love she had proclaimed that day turned out to be selfish. I heard this news without any feeling of satisfaction, only a strange emptiness. The guilty were beginning to pay, but my pain remained. My mother whispered in my ear, "Child, what goes around comes around. Let fate take care of it now. Your job is to live well. to live also for the grandchild we lost. I nodded. My mother was right. I couldn't sink into hatred forever. I had to live. When my health recovered, I decided to be discharged. I didn't want to stay another day in that place that had taken everything from me. Before I left, I resolved my situation with Lawrence once and for all. Through my lawyer, I sent him a final demand. I would not sue the hospital. I would not make the case public, on one condition. He had to sign the divorce and transfer all marital assets to me, including the house where we lived. It was a demand that seemed cruel, but it was what he deserved. The house had been bought mostly with my inheritance. He took my son and my faith from me. He had to give me back what was rightfully mine. Lawrence, having lost everything, had no other choice. He silently signed all the papers. On the day of my discharge, he appeared. He didn't dare enter the room, just stood outside in the hallway, looking through the glass. He was thinner and seemed to have aged 10 years. His gaze was full of remorse and regret, but it was too late. When I, along with my parents, left the room and walked past him, I didn't give him a single glance. To me, that man was dead. My father, however, stopped. He didn't insult him. He didn't hit him. He just looked him in the eyes, his voice deep and hoarse. "Doctor, I'm a countryman. I don't have much education. I only know one thing. You reap what you sow. You destroyed your own happiness and my daughter's life. That's a debt you can never repay." With that, my father turned and helped me walk, leaving Lawrence alone in the cold hospital hallway, with a guilt that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The divorce was finalized quickly. I left the courthouse on a rare day with a blue sky, after a long series of rainy days. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My parents were waiting for me. My mother smiled, a smile of relief. "It's over, child. From now on, a new life." I nodded, taking her hand. Yes, a new life. As we were about to get into a taxi, I saw a familiar figure across the street, Victoria. She was leaning against a luxurious red sports car. She was no longer wearing a patient gown but her usual arrogant and glamorous attire. She saw me and gave a provocative smirk. Her look seemed to say, "See, even though you won, I'm still living well. I have money, power, a life you'll never have." I looked at her for a second, and then turned away. I felt no anger, no pain, only pity. Pity for a beautiful person who had everything, but whose soul was empty and twisted. She could have money, but she would never have peace of mind. What she did would haunt her forever. I got into the car and didn't look back. Lawrence, Victoria, the hospital from that moment on, they were just the past. I decided not to stay in the city any longer. I sold the house, the place I once thought was my home, but which turned out to be a gilded cage built on lies. With the money, I returned to our town in the Central Valley with my parents. The bus ride took us away from the bright city. The skyscrapers and neon lights gave way to green fields and the sound of the wind in the oak trees. The fresh country air filled my lungs, a scent of earth and plants I had long forgotten. My parents' old house was nestled under an ancient fig tree, with a vibrant purple bougainvillea in the yard. Everything was as it was before. I returned not as the wife of a chief of surgery, but simply as Eleanor, my parents' daughter. The days in the country were peaceful. I helped my parents with farm chores, tended the vegetable garden, or simply sat in the yard reading a book. The manual labor and simple life began to heal my wounds, but the pain of losing my son was still there. Every night, I would wake up startled, my hand instinctively going to my belly, that emptiness. 6 months passed. The quiet life helped me find balance. One day, while organizing my old bookshelf, I found a pile of dusty books. They were study guides for the civil service exams that I had bought 5 years ago when I was a recent graduate full of dreams. Back then, I dreamed of being a public servant, of serving my community. But then Lawrence appeared. For him, I gave up the exams, my dreams, my family, to go to the city. I had traded my future for a man who didn't deserve it. A deep regret washed over me. "Mom," I said with tears in my eyes, "I want to start over." It was time to take my life back. The decision to study again ignited a new flame in me. I immersed myself in the books. The knowledge was rusty, but I was determined. Sometimes, to relax, I would walk through the small-town park. One weekend afternoon, as I was sitting on a bench reviewing, a familiar voice sounded beside me. "Hello, Eleanor. I didn't expect to find you here." It was Dr. Daniel. He was no longer wearing a white coat but a simple shirt and pants, looking much younger. "Dr. Evans? What are you doing here?" He smiled. "I'm from this town too. We're neighbors, it seems." He told me that after the incident at the hospital, he felt disgusted by the environment and resigned. He had come home and opened a small clinic. "It may not make much money, but at least my soul is at peace," he said. The admiration I felt for him grew. He had given up a coveted position to keep his conscience clear. We talked for a long time. I felt a peace and trust with him that I hadn't felt in a long time. One day, a former colleague called me. "Eleanor," she said hesitantly, "it's about your ex-husband. He's doing really badly." She told me that Lawrence had lost his medical license for good. No hospital or clinic wanted him. He had sunk into alcoholism, selling everything he had to drink, wandering the streets, drunk, shouting my name and Victoria's. "And her?" I asked. "Oh," my friend laughed. The recording of the call where Lawrence accused me of making a drama and the 911 records confirming the abnormal delay of the ambulance were all presented. Dr. Daniel and the young residents, despite the risk of reprisal, testified bravely. They recounted everything from my arrival in critical condition to Lawrence's indifferent and irresponsible attitude. The hospital's reputation, built over years, was on the brink of collapse. "I know you've been through something terrible, and I don't expect you to open up right away, but I want the chance to take care of you." His simple request touched my heart, but the fear of the past still haunted me. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I'm not ready yet." He smiled kindly. "I understand. I'll wait." A year later, my life had changed immensely. I passed the civil service exams and started working for the county government. The job kept me busy, helping me find myself again. Daniel and I remained close. One winter night, as I was walking home, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Lawrence, thin, dirty, smelling of alcohol. He was unrecognizable. "Eleanor," he cried, his voice hoarse. "It's me. I found you. Eleanor, I was wrong. I lost everything. All I have left is you. Forgive me. Come back to me. We'll start over." His words made me nauseous. He didn't regret hurting me. He only regretted what he had lost. "Get away from me," I shouted, backing away. He staggered toward me, his eyes frantic. "You love me, right? I know you do." He lunged to hug me. I closed my eyes in fear, but the embrace never came. "What are you doing?" a firm voice sounded. Daniel stood in front of me, shielding me. He pushed Lawrence, who fell to the ground. "She's not your wife anymore," Daniel said, his voice calm but full of authority. Lawrence looked at us. "Eleanor, you left me for him? You betrayed me?" I stepped out from behind Daniel and resolutely took his hand. His hand was warm and strong, giving me a sense of absolute security. My action was the clearest answer. The hope in Lawrence's eyes died. He collapsed, laughing hysterically, a heartbreaking sound in the silent night. Then he got up and disappeared into the darkness, his figure lonely and pathetic. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. I shook my head, smiling softly, my hand still in his. "I'm okay, because you're here." I never saw Lawrence again. I heard he wandered around the bus station muttering names. He was alive, but in a way more painful than death. As for Victoria, I read in the papers that she and her new boyfriend were arrested for a major financial fraud scheme. Justice, sometimes late, never fails. Daniel and I officially started dating. We didn't have a big wedding, just an intimate lunch with close family and friends. Our life wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with laughter and peace. He loved me, respected me, and supported me unconditionally. One spring morning, I felt a familiar change in my body. With my heart pounding, I took a pregnancy test. 2 red lines. I went to the mirror, my trembling hand resting on my belly. Tears streamed down, but this time they were tears of happiness. I saw Daniel in the doorway, his eyes also shining with joy. I smiled, a truly complete smile. The storm of my life had passed. My sky was clear and blue again. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer alone. I had a family, a safe harbor. I placed my hand on my belly, where a new life was growing. I whispered, not just for my son, but for myself. "Hello, my angel. This time, Mommy will protect you."